Pax vobiscum. Welcome back to the channel, and to another episode of The Vestal Virgin Reads. Today we are going to continue our reading of Character, The Grandest Thing in the World by Orison Swett Marden. Today we shall continue with Chapter 5, Intrepidity of Spirit. La Tour de Averang, alone in a besieged castle, multiplied himself in effect by shooting first from one window, then from another. When the terms of surrender were arranged, the garrison was allowed to march out with the honors of war. To the astonishment of all, one man, the first grenadier of France, came forth and stacked arms. "But the garrison must abandon the castle," expostulated the Austrian chief. "Where is the garrison?" "I am the garrison," replied Latour proudly. Garibaldi's power over his men amounted to fascination. In Rome he called for 40 volunteers to go where half of them would be killed and others wounded. The whole battalion rushed forward, and they had to draw lots, so eager were they all to obey. What is every man but a magnet, to attract or to be attracted? Every man ultimately falls into the company with which he affiliates, and he is the strongest who draws men to himself, who creates the company, and this is through having a positive quality, moral courage and physical prowess. There was Gentleman George, a young officer, of whom one of our war writers has told us. He spent all his spare hours in study, and daily he read his Bible. Camp life is never private, but George took the jeers of his comrades good-naturedly. He made an exact map of the country about the camp, much to his credit with the colonel of the regiment. When an insane soldier sprang into quarters, George seized him. In the day of battle, George ran in between the firing lines and brought off a wounded lieutenant. And after such exhibitions of the stuff he was made of, no one joked further whenever Gentleman George sat down to read his Bible. "The greatest man," says a recent writer, "is he who chooses right with the most invincible resolution, who resists the sorest temptations from within and without, who bears the heaviest burdens cheerfully, who is calmest in storms and most fearless under menaces and frowns, whose reliance on truth and virtue and on God is most unfaltering." Such a man was Aristides the Just. When Themistocles sought to transfer the government of Greece from the hands of the Lacedaemonians into those of the Athenians, he intimated one day in the popular assembly that he had a very important design to propose, but he could not communicate it to the public at large, because the greatest secrecy was necessary to its success, and he therefore desired that they would appoint a person to whom he might explain himself on the subject. Aristides was unanimously selected by the assembly, which deferred entirely to his opinion. Themistocles, taking him aside, told him that the design he had conceived was to burn the fleet belonging to the rest of the Grecian states, which then lay in a neighboring port, when Athens would assuredly become mistress of all Greece. Aristides returned to the assembly, and declared to them that nothing could be more advantageous to the commonwealth than the project of Themistocles, but that, at the same time, nothing in the world could be more unfair. The assembly unanimously declared that, since such was the case, Themistocles should wholly abandon his project. Is not moral courage always quick to rebuke a wrong? When Bishop Coleridge Patterson was a boy at Eton, he was captain of the 11, and he had the courage to declare that he would resign his captaincy and take no part in the rowing if coarse songs were sung at the annual supper. An objectionable song was sung, and he, with others, at once rose and left the room. It was not until an apology was offered that he resumed his post. So too Gladstone, as a boy at Eton, turned down his glass when an improper toast was proposed. As a schoolboy, the Bishop of Salisbury was kept by Gladstone from evil ways, and the student generations drank less in the years following Gladstone's abstemious courage. This is true always and everywhere. At Harvard University, the idea of what was the manly thing was definitely changed when Arthur Connock threw his athletic influence in favor of temperance in all things, fair play, courtesy, and modesty, Moral courage always tells. Is not trepidity of spirit a requisite in the tent as on the battlefield? I was sitting with General Grant one day, said Clinton B. Fisk, when a major general in full uniform appeared, saying, "Boys, I have a good story to tell. There are no ladies present." "No, but there are gentlemen present," replied the commander-in-chief. When God calls a man to be upright and pure and generous, he also calls him to be intelligent and skillful, and strong and brave. "I will call this Luther a true great man," says Carlyle, "great in intellect, in courage, affection, and integrity, one of our most lovable and precious men. Great not as a hewn obelisk, but as an alpine mountain, so simple, spontaneous, honest, not setting up to be great at all. There for quite another purpose than being great. Ah, yes, unsubduable granite, piercing far and wide into the heavens, yet in the clefts of it fountains green, beautiful valleys with flowers." What is every man but a magnet, to attract or to be attracted? Every man ultimately falls into the company with which he affiliates. So Marden says in this chapter. We have heard of this concept before. The warning of be careful who you hang out with, choose your friends wisely, and even see in some news reports when talking of crime stating, "She got in with the wrong crowd." The Bible also says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." Whether we like it or not, no matter how much we say we are our own, we cannot deny that those around us change and influence us. That is why such warnings and teachings exist. However, Marden goes on to say this, "And he is strongest who draws men to himself, who creates the company, and this is through having a positive quality, moral courage and physical prowess." Today we will dive into this concept of moral courage, which I will personally expand upon and state that it involves the power of being able to say no, the ability to resist temptation, and the strength to not give in to peer pressure. And through the examples that Marden provides, he emphasizes too, I think, the importance of humility and silence as an aspect of moral courage. In particular, let us look back to his story of one Gentleman George, marked for what we could call his prudeness, I guess, and his reading of the Bible every day. George didn't lash out verbally or physically at his fellow officers and men. He handled the prodding good-naturedly, and continued upon his own course, happy with his personal duty. Without a word, though, he changed how those around him treated him. By displaying the depth of character through action, his fellows stopped making fun of him, perhaps picking up on the fact that this man was able to be who he was because of his faith and character. Now, had George gotten angry and returned the jeering, perhaps even verbally or physically assaulted them, this would have exasperated the situation, and would have shown a bad light on his character and indeed tarnished the view of others. While probably difficult to hear at times, George remained humble and silent. George was content with what he felt provided him his inner strength. He didn't give in to the temptation or peer pressure, and he didn't stop reading his Bible. He also didn't give in to the temptation to lash out at his peers. He simply continued on, and let his actions speak for him, and ultimately, I believe, his God. Actions speak louder than words. An age-old saying, and one that we find to be remarkably true. It is so easy to say something, much harder to back it up with action. You can scream all day about an issue or topic, or you can promise until you're blue in the face, but unless you actually do something, all you have is your voice in the void. Now, I'm not saying that words are entirely powerless. In fact, words have great power, but that I believe that words should be tempered with action. They should work together, and neither be empty. And sort of following this thread of thought, I would like to add that I believe that inaction is also action. As an example of this, let's look at the story provided about General Ulysses S. Grant, who swiftly, sternly, yet tactfully shut down one of his peers when the man was about to go into the type of story men would tell when no ladies were present. However, Grant counters with, "No, but there are gentlemen present." General Grant didn't rise and slap the officer, yell at him, berate him, throw things, or severely admonish him. I imagine him in this particular situation sitting at his desk, simply looking up with a stern eye and saying his piece, then turning back to the paperwork at hand. In this case, the words had power, and his inaction diffused the situation, but also made a powerful statement about where he stood in its own right. Again with the example of Gentleman George. He said nothing to his peers about their ribbing of his reading of the Bible every day. In fact, he took the jeers good-naturedly. Through his inaction and lack of words, he accomplished something great, the preservation of a shining backdrop that highlighted his later actions on the battlefield and in the camp, which only served to demonstrate his true character and moral courage without his saying a word. As I've said many times before, with that sort of train of thought, a balance in all things. Continuing on, Marden then quotes a recent writer stating, "The greatest man is he who chooses right with the most invincible resolution, who resists the sorest temptations from within and without, who bears the heaviest burdens cheerfully, who is calmest in storms and most fearless under menaces and frowns, whose reliance on truth, virtue, and on God is most unfaltering." This speaks to the concept of integrity, I think, of doing what is right when nobody is looking. I would argue that doing what is right when others are looking can be difficult too, especially when that which is right is not the norm or what is accepted, and we've talked many times about the bystander effect. And Marden addresses this by saying, "Is not moral courage always quick to rebuke a wrong?" Moral courage requires integrity, and requires the ability to speak up or act when a wrong is being committed. Marden provides examples of young men studying at Eton, who staged walkouts when inappropriate songs were sung, not returning until an apology was given. And another example where a young man turned down his glass when an ungentlemanly toast was given. What I find interesting in these examples provided just after the question, "Is not moral courage always quick to rebuke a wrong?" is that these examples are not of anyone yelling, hitting, screaming, berating, capsizing, being destructive, or doing any number of violent actions or spitting of words. One young man, who would go on to become a bishop later in life, was captain of a rowing team and stated that if coarse songs were sung at the supper, he would leave his post. Not so much a threat as merely a statement on where he stood. And when the song was sung, he didn't just sit there and put up with it. And let us take note that the passage states that he and several others stood and left the room. His actions spoke volumes more than words could, though he used his words to make his initial statement. His walkout spoke even more. And the next example, the young Gladstone. Rather than stand and shake a fist and yell about the toast, he simply turned over his glass. In such a social setting, the silent action was tantamount to shouting out over the table anyway, but was a reserved and I believe distinctly powerful way of showing his distaste for such a toast. Marden states that moral courage always tells. I think that in the examples we've discussed thus far we can truly see that. The stories Marden provided in this chapter demonstrate how powerful word, action, and inaction can be. They also highlighted how moral courage is transformative to those around the individual who displays it, fitting into the magnet quote at the beginning of the chapter. Those of good moral character transform those around them, and indeed the environments for the better, and they do it with humility, tact, and strength of character. The intrepidity of spirit is to be morally courageous. To be morally courageous is to find strength in oneself and one's faith, rather than the validation of those around us. And to be morally courageous is to be transformative. Dear friends, I pray that you have the intrepidity of spirit, and that you have the moral courage to transform yourself and thereby transform the world around you for the better. Pax vobiscum. Goodbye.